Hello, Cancer. I'm really glad you're here today. Before we begin, just give yourself a quiet moment. Let your shoulders relax, take one slow breath in, and let it go. There's something very tender about the energy surrounding you right now. It feels as though a heart that has been silent for far too long is finally reaching the point where it can no longer keep everything inside. As I sit with your cards, I don't feel rushed. I feel emotion. I feel hesitation. And above all, I feel someone wondering if the door to your heart is still open for them. The first card that gently reveals itself is the Lovers. It's interesting because this energy doesn't arrive with loud declarations or dramatic promises. Instead, it feels like someone sitting alone, replaying conversations they never had the courage to finish. They remember the little moments more than the big ones. The sound of your voice, the way you smiled without realizing it, the comfort they felt simply knowing you existed somewhere in the world. Cancer. It feels as though you've become the one person they quietly compare everyone else to, even if they never admit it out loud. I keep hearing a question repeating itself inside their mind. Would Cancer still listen if I came back? Would they even want to hear what I have to say? There's hope inside that question, but there's also fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from rejection alone. It's the fear of realizing they waited too long. Sometimes people convince themselves there will always be another opportunity, another conversation, another tomorrow. Yet somewhere deep inside, this person has started to understand that hearts don't remain open forever without care. Then Page of Cups gently slips into the reading, and suddenly the atmosphere softens even more. It's almost as if this person has been practicing conversations with you in their imagination. They picture themselves finally saying the words they buried months ago, maybe even years ago for some of you. They imagine your expression. They wonder whether you would smile, cry, stay silent, or simply walk away. Yeah, they've rehearsed these moments countless times, but every imagined version ends differently because they simply don't know where your heart stands anymore. There's something beautifully vulnerable about this energy. It doesn't feel manipulative. It doesn't feel calculated. It feels like someone discovering that no amount of pride can replace genuine emotional honesty. They've carried these feelings quietly for so long that even they are surprised by how heavy they've become. It's almost like holding your breath for too many years and suddenly realizing how desperately you need fresh air. As Six of Cups joins the story, memories begin flowing naturally between the cards. I don't think this person remembers you only because of what happened between the two of you. They remember who they became whenever you were around. That's a very different kind of memory. You made ordinary days feel softer. Even difficult moments somehow carried warmth because you were there. Cancer, your presence seems to have become a safe place inside their heart, one they keep returning to whenever life becomes overwhelming. Okay. Here's something that feels especially meaningful. This person doesn't simply miss the relationship, if there even was one. They miss the possibility that existed whenever the two of you shared space. The possibility of growing together, laughing together, building quiet routines that don't seem extraordinary until they're suddenly gone. They imagine peaceful mornings, random conversations that last for hours, simple evenings where nothing remarkable happens except feeling completely understood. Those little visions keep finding their way back into their mind, no matter how hard they try to focus on something else. I also sense that you've changed, Cancer. Maybe not dramatically on the outside, but your energy feels different, more grounded, more protective of your peace. Without realizing it, you've created a little distance between yourself and everything that once exhausted your heart. Ironically, that quiet strength seems to be what has stirred something awake inside this person. They're beginning to see you through clearer eyes than ever before. The final card resting gently beside the others is Two of Cups, and I almost smiled when it appeared. Not because it promises a certain outcome, but because it carries the feeling of two hearts still recognizing one another beneath all the silence. Sometimes, connections don't disappear. Sometimes they simply wait beneath layers of fear, misunderstanding, timing, and unspoken emotion until someone becomes brave enough to speak first. Oh my God, It really feels like someone has reached the point where pretending no longer brings them peace. They may still hesitate. They may still wonder if it's already too late. But somewhere inside, they're beginning to understand that unanswered questions often weigh heavier than difficult answers ever could. The energy doesn't stop here, though. As these cards settle, I can already feel another layer beginning to unfold, one that reveals why this person has resisted these feelings for so long, and why, despite everything, you remain the one exception they simply haven't been able to forget. There's something fascinating about this energy, because the more I sit with it, the more I realize you're dealing with someone who has spent a large part of their life convincing both themselves and everyone around them that they don't really need anyone. They carry themselves with quiet confidence. They appear capable, independent, almost impossible to reach emotionally. People probably look at them and think they've got everything under control. But, Cancer, appearances have a way of hiding the stories that hearts refuse to tell. The first card resting gently on the table is King of Cups, and I almost smiled because this person seems to feel far more than they ever allow themselves to show. Their emotions run deep, but they've built such strong walls around them that even they sometimes forget what's waiting behind those walls. They aren't unfamiliar with love. They're unfamiliar with surrendering to it. Those are two very different things. Yeah, you've somehow become the exception to every emotional rule they've spent years creating. It's almost confusing for them. They may have walked away from other connections without looking back. They may have believed that distance always solved everything, but your energy doesn't seem to fade the way they expected. Instead, it quietly follows them into ordinary moments. While driving home, sitting alone after work, scrolling through their phone late at night. Your presence seems to appear without asking permission, and no matter how often they try to distract themselves, their thoughts always circle back to you. Cancer, I don't think they fully understand why this happens. They've asked themselves more than once why you're different. Why your absence feels heavier than anyone else's. Why your silence seems louder than every conversation happening around them. Oh my God! Sometimes the strongest people become the most vulnerable when they meet the one soul capable of reaching places they've spent years protecting. As Four of Pentacles quietly joins the reading, another layer begins unfolding. This isn't only about holding on to emotions anymore. It's about holding on to you. Even if they never openly admit it, there's something possessive beginning to grow beneath the surface. Not necessarily because they want to control you, but because they're becoming increasingly aware that you're valuable in ways they didn't fully appreciate before. They notice little things that suddenly make them uncomfortable. Maybe someone likes your photo. Maybe they wonder who you're spending your weekends with. Maybe they imagine someone else making you laugh the way they wish they had. Those thoughts arrive unexpectedly, and every single one reminds them that life continues moving forward whether they're ready or not. The interesting part is that this jealousy doesn't seem to come from arrogance. It feels more connected to regret. Regret has a strange way of making people recognize what they've overlooked. They begin protecting something only after realizing it may no longer belong to them. There's a quiet ache surrounding this energy, almost as though they're finally seeing your worth through the possibility of losing access to your world. Okay, this next card changes the atmosphere beautifully. Knight of Cups carries an entirely different rhythm. It almost feels like this person's heart has started moving faster than their fear. They're imagining conversations that once seemed impossible, small gestures, honest apologies, invitations they never had the courage to extend before. I keep seeing someone wanting to create memories instead of simply remembering old ones. For some of you, this person may even be questioning what commitment truly means. Not because they've never heard the word, but because they're beginning to imagine themselves inside a relationship that feels emotionally safe instead of emotionally convenient. You seem to have changed their definition of partnership without even trying. It's no longer about keeping life simple or avoiding vulnerability. Somewhere inside, they're discovering that sharing life with the right person may actually feel lighter than carrying everything alone. Cancer, your energy seems to awaken something incredibly gentle inside someone who normally survives by appearing untouchable. That's why this connection feels so unusual. Around everyone else, they know exactly who they're supposed to be. Around you, they aren't entirely sure anymore. Somehow, that uncertainty feels strangely comforting instead of frightening. The final card appearing here is the Devil, and rather than creating darkness, it reveals intensity. Their emotions have reached a point where ignoring them requires more energy than acknowledging them. They may catch themselves wondering who's texting you, whether someone new has captured your attention, whether you're slowly building a beautiful life that no longer includes them. These thoughts don't seem to leave as quickly as they arrive. There's also a protective instinct quietly growing here. They don't simply want to be close to you. Part of them wants to know you're safe, happy, appreciated, seen for who you truly are. It's almost as if loving you has gradually shifted from being a feeling they tried to suppress into something they instinctively want to nurture, even if they haven't figured out how to express it yet. Every emotion they've hidden seems to be reshaping the person they're becoming, and that inner transformation is beginning to ripple into choices they never imagined making before. The path ahead feels quieter, but it also feels far more revealing, because some distances have a way of teaching lessons that pride never could. Sometimes life has a quiet way of teaching lessons that no conversation ever could. The room grows still as the hermit settles into this reading, and I immediately feel someone standing alone with thoughts they can no longer outrun. They may have believed that creating distance would make everything easier. Maybe they expected time to erase the emotions. Maybe they convinced themselves that staying busy would eventually replace the space you occupied in their heart. But Cancer, silence has become a mirror, and every time they look into it, they somehow find pieces of you reflected back. The interesting thing is that this solitude doesn't feel like punishment. It feels more like an invitation. Without the noise of everyday distractions, they're finally hearing emotions they spent a long time pushing aside. Those late evenings have become different lately. They find themselves remembering conversations they once brushed off. Little moments that seemed ordinary at the time suddenly carry unexpected meaning. A smile, a glance, a quiet goodbye. Funny how memories often grow brighter once they're no longer happening. Yeah, I don't think they expected to miss the emotional safety you created simply by being yourself. You were never trying to compete with the world around them. You were simply offering a place where they didn't have to pretend. Looking back, they're beginning to understand how rare that actually was. People come and go. Conversations happen every day, but very few souls leave behind a feeling that continues living long after they're gone. As judgment gently enters the reading, everything begins shifting inside this person's perspective. It's almost like they're waking up from a version of themselves that believed love could always wait. They're questioning choices they once defended so confidently. Decisions that made perfect sense months ago suddenly feel incomplete. Sometimes maturity doesn't arrive because someone explains it to us. Sometimes it arrives because we finally become honest enough to see ourselves without excuses. Cancer, I keep hearing them replay certain moments differently. They're no longer asking what you could have done differently. They're asking themselves what they could have understood sooner. That's a completely different conversation. It takes humility to revisit the past without trying to rewrite someone else's role in the story. It feels like they're finally allowing themselves to carry responsibility instead of constantly searching for reasons outside themselves. Oh my God, there's a softness growing inside them that wasn't there before. Not weakness, softness. Those are completely different energies. The walls they built to protect themselves are becoming less important than the possibility of truly connecting with another human being. They may never become the most expressive person overnight, but something inside them has undeniably shifted toward honesty rather than avoidance. The atmosphere becomes even more emotional as Five of Cups quietly appears. This card carries the feeling of someone recognizing what was present only after it slipped beyond easy reach. There are moments when they wonder how many opportunities quietly passed between the two of you without either of you fully realizing their importance. Regret has a peculiar way of slowing time. It invites people to sit with choices they can no longer change, while hoping they may still shape what comes next. I don't sense that they're drowning in sadness every single day. It's subtler than that. Certain songs pause them unexpectedly. Certain places remind them of your energy. They catch themselves smiling at something before remembering why that smile feels bittersweet. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply recognizing how deeply another person became woven into your everyday life. Cancer, there's something else your energy seems to have awakened inside them. They no longer measure love by excitement alone. They're beginning to recognize the quiet forms of love, the consistency, the patience, the feeling of someone remaining emotionally present even when life became complicated. Those qualities may not have impressed them before, but they seem incredibly valuable from where they're standing today. When the Hanged Man completes this part of the reading, everything slows down again. I don't see someone rushing toward conclusions anymore. Instead, I see someone learning to pause before reacting, learning to observe before assuming, learning that changing perspective often changes everything else alongside it. It's almost as though they've stepped outside the version of themselves that always needed to be right, and for the first time, they're becoming curious about what your heart may have been carrying all along. One thought continues floating through this entire reading. Out of everyone they've encountered, you're the person whose presence never truly disappeared. Life introduced new faces, new responsibilities, new routines, yet somehow your place remained untouched. They may not have admitted that even to themselves until recently, but your name has quietly stayed in the safest corner of their heart, patiently waiting for the day they became ready to understand why. That realization is changing far more than their memories. It's beginning to influence the choices they're preparing to make, because somewhere ahead, another layer of this connection is quietly unfolding, one that reveals how your own transformation may become impossible for them to ignore. Something feels noticeably different the moment these cards begin to unfold. It's subtle at first, almost impossible to explain with logic alone, but it's there. The energy around you doesn't feel the same anymore, Cancer. It feels brighter, calmer, like someone who has slowly stopped chasing answers and started choosing peace instead. Whether you've realized it or not, you've been changing from the inside out, and somehow this person can feel it even from a distance. The first card to appear is Page of Swords, and I immediately sense someone paying much closer attention than they let on. They notice the little shifts. Maybe it's the way you carry yourself. Maybe it's something you posted that seemed completely ordinary to everyone else. Maybe it's the fact that you've become a little quieter, a little less available, a little more focused on your own life. Whatever it is, they can't seem to stop observing it. Yeah, it's almost as if they're trying to solve a puzzle they didn't realize they had created. They wonder what's changed. They ask themselves whether you've met someone new, whether you've finally found happiness without them, or whether you've simply reached the point where you no longer need the answers they never gave you. Those questions seem to visit them more often than they'd probably admit. Cancer, your silence feels very different now. Before, it may have carried sadness or uncertainty. This silence carries confidence. It doesn't feel like you're waiting, it feels like you're living. And oddly enough, that's exactly what unsettles this person the most. They had become familiar with the version of you that always left the emotional door slightly open. Seeing you stand comfortably within your own world makes them realize that life doesn't stop simply because someone hesitates. As the star gently shines across this reading, your energy becomes even more beautiful. I don't necessarily see dramatic changes. I see healing, the kind that happens quietly over time. Maybe you've been taking better care of yourself. Maybe you've started trusting your own intuition more. Maybe you've finally stopped questioning your worth every time someone failed to recognize it. Oh my God, there's something incredibly peaceful about this version of you. What's interesting is that your healing seems to awaken something inside them as well. They begin wondering why your light feels even stronger after everything you've been through. Instead of becoming bitter, you've become softer with yourself. Instead of chasing validation, you're learning to give it to yourself first. That quiet confidence carries a magnetic quality that doesn't ask for attention, yet somehow receives it naturally. The atmosphere shifts again, as the Empress settles beside the other cards. Cancer, This energy feels incredibly nurturing, but it's directed toward yourself before anyone else. You're no longer pouring every ounce of love into someone else's empty cup. You're remembering that your own heart deserves tenderness too. That change is impossible for this person to ignore. They've started seeing you differently, not because you've become someone else, but because you're finally allowing your own value to shine without constantly trying to prove it. There's something graceful about that. They look at you and realize that if someone else were given the opportunity to know the version of you standing here today, they would probably recognize just how extraordinary you are. I keep sensing little flashes of jealousy appearing beneath the surface. Not loud jealousy, quiet jealousy. The kind that asks, who gets to spend time with Cancer these days? They wonder who makes you smile. They wonder whether someone else is noticing everything they once overlooked. Even imagining another person appreciating your kindness seems to stir emotions they weren't prepared to face. This person doesn't simply fear losing your attention anymore. They're beginning to understand what life might actually look like if someone else became the safe place they once had the chance to become. That realization has a way of changing priorities rather quickly. When Ace of Cups arrives, the entire reading softens again. It feels like their heart has started opening in ways they never expected. Instead of only thinking about what they want, they're beginning to think about what they could actually offer. They don't seem interested in repeating old patterns. Their thoughts drift toward fresh beginnings, honest conversations, emotional openness. They imagine showing up differently this time, not because someone forced them to change, but because they genuinely want to become someone capable of protecting what matters. Yeah, there's another feeling I can't quite ignore. They don't really want this connection to remain hidden anymore. Part of them dreams about reaching the point where your relationship no longer feels uncertain or undefined. They picture introducing you with pride instead of hesitation. They imagine building something that doesn't have to exist behind closed doors or inside unanswered questions. Cancer, I also sense preparation happening behind the scenes. Nothing dramatic, nothing impulsive, more like someone quietly organizing their thoughts, gathering courage, and trying to understand the best way to approach someone whose heart they deeply respect. They know appearances alone won't be enough. Consistency matters now. Actions matter now. Trust matters now. Whatever they're considering seems to require patience, because deep down they understand that meaningful connections aren't rebuilt overnight. Every step forward has to carry sincerity instead of urgency. As these cards gently settle, another chapter begins whispering beneath the surface, one that speaks less about longing and much more about the future they can no longer stop imagining with you. The atmosphere becomes incredibly gentle as these cards settle onto the table. The energy no longer feels caught between uncertainty and hesitation. It feels quieter than that, more intentional. It's almost like someone has stopped asking themselves whether they should care and started asking a completely different question. If I were given another chance, what kind of life would I actually want to build with Cancer? That shift may seem small on the surface, but emotionally, it changes everything. The first card resting here is Ten of Pentacles, and the images flowing through this reading aren't dramatic at all. They're beautifully ordinary. I see peaceful mornings filled with laughter instead of tension. I see someone imagining holidays spent together, cooking dinner in the same kitchen, celebrating birthdays, supporting one another through difficult seasons, and finding comfort in knowing there's always someone waiting at the end of the day. It's not the excitement they're dreaming about anymore. It's stability. Cancer, I don't think this person is only missing your presence. They're missing the feeling of home that somehow existed whenever you were near. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person whose energy allows you to breathe a little easier. Someone who makes silence feel comforting instead of uncomfortable. Someone who reminds you that you don't have to earn love by constantly proving your worth. Yeah, that's the feeling I keep returning to. Peace. For a long time, they may have mistaken intensity for love. They may have believed relationships had to feel unpredictable in order to feel meaningful, but something inside them has softened over time. They're beginning to understand that the healthiest kind of love often feels surprisingly calm. It doesn't constantly ask you to survive it, it quietly invites you to grow within it. As the Hierophant gently joins the reading, I sense this person thinking much further ahead than they used to. They're no longer imagining temporary happiness or fleeting emotions. Their thoughts seem to revolve around commitment in a way they may never have seriously considered before. They're asking themselves what it would mean to truly show up for someone every single day, even after the excitement settles into ordinary life. Cancer, your influence appears to have reshaped their understanding of partnership. Before, they may have viewed commitment as losing freedom. Somehow you've helped them see another possibility. Commitment can also mean gaining a teammate, gaining someone who celebrates your victories, sits beside you during your losses, and continues choosing you through seasons that aren't always easy. Oh my God, there's something deeply touching about that realization because it doesn't feel forced, it feels earned. Life has quietly taught them lessons that pride never could, and those lessons seem to have brought them back to the same conclusion over and over again. Out of everyone they've met, your heart continues to feel like the safest place they've ever known. The energy grows even more grounded as Ace of Pentacles appears. This card feels less like fantasy and more like intention. They aren't only imagining conversations anymore, they're thinking about real steps. Small ones perhaps, but meaningful nonetheless. They want to create something lasting instead of repeating cycles that eventually fall apart. Whether that's rebuilding trust, making consistent effort, or simply showing up differently, there's a genuine desire to place something solid beneath this connection, instead of relying on promises alone. I also sense them questioning their own habits. They know that love cannot survive on beautiful words without dependable actions. That awareness feels important because it suggests they're beginning to understand the difference between wanting someone and being emotionally prepared to care for them. Those are not always the same thing. Then, the Empress quietly fills the space with warmth once again, and your energy becomes impossible to overlook. Cancer, there's something about the way you love that continues to leave a lasting impression on this person. You offered compassion without asking for perfection. You created emotional safety without demanding that someone become flawless first. Looking back, they realize how rare that truly was. Your kindness wasn't weakness. Your patience wasn't something to be taken for granted. They're beginning to understand that nurturing love requires courage, consistency, and emotional maturity. Those qualities seem far more valuable to them today than they once did. Despite all of these beautiful feelings, one quiet fear still lingers beneath the surface. They wonder if they've arrived too late. They question whether your heart still has enough room for someone who once struggled to recognize everything you were trying to give. It's not simply rejection they're afraid of. They're afraid that trust, once broken, may not return as easily as love itself. Sometimes they imagine standing in front of you with complete honesty, only to wonder whether you'd believe the person they've become. That's a vulnerable place to stand. It requires them to release the version of themselves that always needed certainty before taking emotional risks. Cancer, your heart seems to have inspired them to dream differently, but dreams alone won't carry this connection forward. Somewhere inside, they understand that genuine love asks for patience, humility, and the willingness to grow alongside another person, instead of expecting everything to remain the same. The story doesn't quite end with visions of tomorrow, though. Another layer is quietly waiting beneath these cards, one that reveals how profound inner transformation may become the foundation for whatever path unfolds from here, both for them and for you. The final cards settle with a completely different rhythm. There's no urgency here, no feeling of chasing or forcing an outcome. Instead, it feels like standing at the edge of a new season just before the first sunrise appears. The air is different. The silence is different. Even this person's heart seems to beat differently than it once did. Cancer, whatever has been unfolding beneath the surface, no longer feels like temporary emotion. It feels like transformation. The first card resting quietly before us is Death, and I immediately sense someone releasing an older version of themselves. Not because someone demanded they change, but because they can finally see that the patterns they kept repeating were leading them farther away from the life they truly wanted. Some chapters don't end because they're failures. They end because the soul has simply outgrown them. Yeah, I keep feeling this person looking back at certain habits with completely different eyes. The emotional distance they once protected, the conversations they avoided, the walls they believed kept them safe. Those things may have helped them survive at one point, but they no longer seem capable of helping them build the kind of love they secretly long for. There's a quiet acceptance growing inside them that healing sometimes begins with letting old identities fade away. Cancer, this feels less like losing something and more like making space. Every old fear they slowly release creates room for honesty. Every outdated belief they leave behind opens another window inside their heart. It's not always an easy process. Growth rarely asks permission before it changes someone's life. But I do feel them becoming more willing to embrace discomfort if it leads them towards something real. The atmosphere grows lighter as the Fool appears, almost like fresh air entering a room that has been closed for years. I don't see recklessness here. I see courage. The quiet kind, the courage to begin again without demanding guarantees. The courage to admit they don't have every answer but still believe some journeys are worth taking anyway. Oh my God. There's something beautiful about watching someone rediscover hope after carrying so much emotional weight. They seem less interested in controlling every possible outcome. Instead, they're learning to trust the process of becoming someone who can love with openness instead of fear. That doesn't mean every uncertainty disappears. It simply means uncertainty no longer decides every choice they make. Cancer, your own journey seems deeply connected to this energy as well. While they've been changing in their own way, you've also been growing into someone who understands your own worth more clearly than before. Because of that, if your paths were ever to cross again, the connection would not be meeting the same two people who once stood before each other. Both hearts have gathered new wisdom. Both souls have carried lessons that couldn't have been learned any other way. As the magician quietly reveals itself, I sense this person beginning to recognize something they overlooked for a long time. They've always had the ability to choose differently. They simply didn't believe they could rewrite the emotional patterns they inherited. Somewhere along the way, they've realized that love isn't only about finding the right person. It's also about becoming the version of yourself that's capable of protecting what you found. Yeah, there's a growing sense of personal responsibility surrounding this card. They no longer seem focused on changing circumstances first. They're beginning with themselves. Their words, their reactions, their consistency, their willingness to communicate instead of withdraw. Those quiet internal shifts may not be visible to everyone immediately, but they often become the strongest foundation for lasting change. When judgment returns to the reading, it feels remarkably peaceful. There's no sense of punishment here, only clarity. They seem able to look at the past without running from it and without allowing it to define every tomorrow. They understand that mistakes may shape a person, but they don't have to imprison them forever. That's an incredibly liberating realization. Cancer, I also feel this card inviting you to recognize something important within your own journey. Your healing has never been about waiting for someone else to become ready. Your healing has always been about finding your own light regardless of who chooses to walk beside you. Ironically, that inner peace often changes the energy of every connection around you. The final card, the Empress, wraps this reading in warmth that feels almost impossible to put into words. It reminds me that genuine love grows best where kindness, patience, and mutual respect have room to breathe. Whatever future eventually unfolds, it deserves to be rooted in emotional safety rather than fear, in honesty rather than assumption, and in quiet consistency rather than empty promises. I don't feel this story ending with dramatic declarations. It feels much softer than that. Like two people gradually becoming the versions of themselves they always had the potential to be. Whether their paths meet again, or continue teaching different lessons for a while longer, one truth continues flowing gently through every card we've shared together. Love becomes most meaningful when it is allowed to mature alongside the people who carry it. Cancer, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this reading resonated with your heart, take only what feels true for your own journey and allow the rest to unfold in its own time. You are deeply appreciated. You are more loved than you may sometimes realize, and I truly hope this message brought a little peace to your day. Take good care of yourself, and I'll be here to share another reading with you very soon. Goodbye for now, Cancer.